Hello there, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we'll be taking a look at the latest reissue of Pink Floyd, Live in Pompeii, which arrived May 2nd on Blu-ray, DVD, CD, and vinyl editions. Presented here in a new 4K scan with new stereo, 5.1, and Dolby Atmos mixes from Steven Wilson. Obviously, for the purposes of this review, I'll be taking a look at the Blu-ray edition. Directed by Adrian Mabin, Live in Pompeii captures a fascinating glimpse of the band nearing the end of their experimental and daring improvisational phase, and on the cusp of their more accessible yet conceptual works, like The Dark Side of the Moon. It was filmed over 3 days in October of 1971 in the empty Roman amphitheater in Pompeii, Italy, with studio pickups completed in France later that year. Live in Pompeii is an outstanding document, and it's a psychedelic rock classic. The film was originally released in September of 1972 and later reissued in 1973 with added footage from the Dark Side of the Moon recording sessions. Later, in 2002, a director's cut version was released with added studio footage, cropped aspect ratio, and CGI sequences added in. There was yet another version released in 2016 as part of the early years 1972 box set with a new mix and transfer, but I never bought it, so I can't compare or comment. I'm guessing most fans are probably familiar with the DVD version like I am, so much of my reference point will actually come from this version from 2002. The feature version presented here best reflects the 1973 reissue version, with the studio footage added in. However, you do have the option to watch the concert uninterrupted, which is closer in spirit to the 1972 version. Pink Floyd Live in Pompeii is an outstanding document, and it's a psychedelic rock classic. The classic lineup of Roger Waters, bass vocals, David Gilmour, guitar vocals, Rick Wright, keyboards, and Nick Mason are in place here, but we're still a couple of short years away from the conceptual best-selling albums like Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall. With Live in Pompeii, director Adrian Mabin sought to create a video album, and I think that's the best way to approach this work. The images of the Pompeii amphitheater are impressive and cinematic indeed, but it's the music that is the star and focal point here. Indeed, sometimes the added studio footage from December of 1971 can be a bit dated looking. Mabin and the band were both unhappy with it at the time, and it's easy to see why. Then, there's songs like One of These Days, where the extra footage of the band members has been lost to time, and we get heavy Nickovision. Of course, focusing on Nick Mason shows what a monstrous force of a drummer he is, and any complaints that he was the weak link in the band should now be put to rest. Watch as he drops his drumstick, whips out another, and proceeds to land a jaw-dropping fill like nothing happened. That said, I think I enjoyed this concert the most, actually when I shut the TV screen off and listened intently to the music. It is simply amazing to have an early Floyd multi-channel disc that sounds this good, and I feel that Live in Pompeii captures the Floyd at their absolute height as a live band. The setlist itself certainly demonstrates just how much range there was to these guys' music. Echoes is such a rich and emotive song, but then you have the chaos of A Saucerful of Secrets and the meditative Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. In Mademoiselle Knobs, we even have a dog who sings the blues. Echoes Part 1 and Part 2 are my favorite of the selections, but I enjoy every track. When the band land into that funk groove in Echoes Part 1, and David is conjuring spirits with his guitar solo, I'm in musical heaven. That funk groove underneath is one of my absolute favorite things in music, but both parts of Echoes are such emotive powerhouses. Other musical highlights for me include the primal shriek of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, which contains music's greatest jump scare, the controlled abandon of Saucerful of Secrets, though I do find David's wordless singing at the end of this spoils it a bit for me. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. Always a favorite, though arguably I think it's at its best on some of Roger's solo tours. I do love the bubbling undercurrent that might explode at any moment that this version offers, but it never quite does. This also seems to fit nicely with Mabin's volcanic imagery. Taking a look at the new 4K transfer, I can't help but notice how massive of an improvement it is over my 2002 Director's Cut DVD copy. It's clear, it's in the proper aspect ratio, and the colors look great. However, I can't help but think that it could look a little bit better if presented on a 4K UHD disc. As you can see here from this graphic, 1080p Blu-ray quality is much more compressed than a full 2160p source would be. However, I understand that most viewers probably haven't upgraded to the new format. It's not a point I intend to belabor because I want to emphasize that this footage is the best it's ever looked to me. Steven Wilson's Dolby Atmos and 5.1 mixes are lovingly crafted. There are advantages to both the 5.1 and Dolby Atmos presentations, but I do think that the 5.1 mix sounds a tiny bit better. The 5.1 mix is noticeably fuller, richer, and all the instruments seem to be more present, but truthfully, you really can't go wrong with either. Curiously, the Atmos mix can only be played during the feature version, the 1973 version with the Dark Side of the Moon recording session footage, but I think that this is actually a strength. I could foresee me turning off the film and playing the audio in 5.1 and enjoying the soundtrack on its own on occasion, without being interrupted by the interview footage. Listening to Steven Wilson's interview with Nick Mason from the BFI IMAX on YouTube, I learned that Wilson had very sparse materials to work with. In fact, most of the mix was built on 4 mono tracks, 1 per each musician, plus overdubs. It's not exactly optimal materials for an Atmos mix. In fact, quad might have been the more appropriate format, but Wilson does a lot with very little. I admire his choice to present this music relatively dry and without any detectable post-production reverb effects. What you get here is the full ambience of that ancient stone amphitheater, which captures such a magical atmosphere and mood. Speaking of the multi-channel mixes, it's fun little moments like when Roger Waters is building up on the run on the synthesizer during the studio session sequences that make me smile. As he's twisting the knobs, Wilson is sending the synths in unpredictable directions, but it all seems to correspond to Roger's turn of the knobs. In Dolby Atmos, this is especially cool because it's one of the few times that the program utilizes the height speakers. I also noticed the heights kick in a little bit on the vocal overdubs on echoes, which I really appreciated. Otherwise, the 5.1 mix seems to have a little bit more punch to it, particularly in the drums, which sound outstanding despite being taken from a mono source. I swear, at times Nick Mason's drums and cymbals are panning and following the action on screen, which is amazing if Wilson was able to wring that out of a mono source. Nick's toms sound so full and lifelike, punchy and powerful. This comes as such a relief to me, because I found his parts were a bit overprocessed on the recent Dark Side of the Moon and Animals Atmos mixes. The band sound like spirits bubbling in your room, rising up from the ether. Dave Gilmour's psychedelic guitar cascades around your room on A Saucer Full of Secrets. There's not a huge amount of rear channel activity, but it's usually used in a more supportive role, which fills out the sounds. Rick Wright's organ tone on this is pretty much the dream. They seem to swell and fill the room. Sometimes the keyboards appear to come from the back, but are often prominently toward the front right, as per his stage setup. And I love the way his twinkly organ notes and set the controls for the Heart of the Sun seem to float around the room. Never has Roger Waters' bass sounded so prominent in a mix to me. I've never been able to focus quite this well on his bass playing in the way that I have been here, and I think that owes a lot to Steven Wilson's mixing style. It's an incredible listen. So if you're a fan of this material, and you love the film, and you love Pink Floyd, and you're on the fence, I say check this out. The new mixes really shine to me, and I think that if you love this material, you won't be disappointed. It might have been nice to have a 4K UHD disc of this, but who knows? Maybe if the Blu-ray sells well enough, in a year's time or sooner, we might get that. I do think it would have been nice to have the director's cut included for posterity's sake. The meme of Roger blowing smoke rings has become something of a classic for fans of my generation in particular. So I do recommend hanging on to that old DVD because it doesn't appear in these versions. If nothing else, hang on to that old DVD version for director Adrian Mabin's interview, which is enlightening to say the least, and provided a lot of helpful research for this review. I think it would have been nice to include the original 70s quad mix if it were available. I'm not sure if that was ever released, and it would be fascinating, I think, to compare, especially given the way that this set was recorded. Lastly, I would like to commend Sony Records for releasing this in a standalone Blu-ray, vinyl, CD, and DVD versions, and not locking them in a pricey boxed set. A few standalone discs like this have come out lately, and it's a trend that I would like to see continue. It allows me to have a greater diversity of musical selection and to take chances on stuff that I otherwise wouldn't. Well, what are your thoughts? How do you like the new release of Pink Floyd Live in Pompeii? Would you purchase a 4K UHD disc? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I have a flood of new release reviews coming, including Gentle Giant's Playing the Fool, which has come out in a newly restored Atmos mix, as well as the new Frank Zappa video, Cheaper Than Cheap, which should come sometime next week. Until next time, see you later. Bye-bye.